Okay. Some attendees coming in. That's brilliant. Awesome. There we are. 15, 17. Okay. As people are joining, I might just wait a minute or two before we kick into gear. But thank you so much for registering and attending, everyone. Cool. 25. I'll wait till the numbers slow down. All right. Thanks, Dan. I think we've slowed down now. So I will hit record. Already recording. Cool. Right on. Okay, everyone. I might kick into gear now, just in the interest of time and so on. So I just wanted to, I guess, welcome you to our first webinar for the year and introduce myself and the other panelists there on our team, Alex Perret. Wave, Alex. Thank you, Alex. So yeah, welcome. So the webinar that we're viewing today is in the realm of psychometric assessments, and more specifically, a situation that I guess does pop up more often than not is when your next selection is absolutely critical. And I suppose every selection is critical, but some are ultra critical. And I want to talk about a couple of different situations that pops up for us today. But I guess by way of introduction, as I said, Ian Haslam. So I'm a senior consultant with Mapien, specifically also the team lead for our psychometric assessment function and service as well. And this is something that is pretty close to my heart, just in terms of my own realm within the psychological sphere. And it goes along with my title as well. So I'm a psychologist, but more specifically, an organizational psychologist with a specific focus on really robustly measuring psychometric constructs and being able to utilize these both for a candidate, for a participant, for our clients to get the best outcome possible. I guess the purpose behind these webinars is that we have a lot of knowledge and we want to share a lot of knowledge. And so the idea is that we want to bring that understanding in a way that's easily digested and translatable, and bringing that science and that data to the forefront as well, to be able to talk about it frankly, to be able to speak in a really direct way about these things that we use day to day. And I love talking about this stuff. I've got you captive for a good 55 extra minutes, but I could talk about this for hours if you let me. If you trap me, you know, from one-on-one, I can talk about this stuff all day. So I'll try to keep it compact and not go off on too many tangents. But I suppose the biggest thing to highlight is just that experience that I have in psychometrics. So, you know, trained in it, started my career in it. I've been hitting different notes through the process as well. But the very first thing I did in my career is build these things, build psychometric assessments for selection, personality assessments, cognitive ability, so reasoning and problem solving and so on. And from there, delivering to clients, delivering to candidates, very, very big bulk volume selection programs, really, really niche kind of one-off tests, really high stakes, public sector, private sector, lots of different specific roles as well that are really hard to kind of source talent for, and robust processes around that. So I've got a lot of stories to tell, and I won't go into too many of them today because, like I said, we'll be here for a good 6 or 7 hours. No one wants to hear my voice for that long, but I do hope to cover a fair bit of ground with you today. So just to get onto that side of things, by way of agenda, we're halfway through the welcome now, which is great, but I really want to talk to the idea that when a selection decision is critical, that infers that it can go wrong. And when it does go wrong, there is a really significant cost to that decision, both in terms of money, direct costs, and ongoing, end up being financial costs, but a lot of other outcomes at the same time as well. So I want to talk to some of those and the idea or the magnitude of the amount of costing there before moving into some what will hopefully be some familiar looking processes for you, some familiar situations. So using psychometric assessments at that really high stakes selection process when it is absolutely company, organizational, departmentally critical to get that hire right. At what seems to be the other end of the spectrum, but it's very similar in a lot of ways, is the concept of expanding a very, very small, very close-knit team. It's equally as critical, just given the idea or the facts that a small team has a specific way about it, and adding a new factor into that small team can have a massive difference, both positive and negative. So the idea is to 100% get that right, or the team is sunk. And another really interesting concept and situation that we find ourselves in with our clients is trying to fill very, very unique, niche specific roles as well. Roles that where the candidates are pretty few and far between, and take some really specific qualifications, and on top of those qualifications, there needs to be some really focused competencies that need to be hit before you can make a decision. Before moving on to some frequently asked questions that I do get a lot of from our clients, and some Q&As as they pop up as well. So by way of process, what we'd encourage you to do, if any questions pop up for you, is please don't be shy and don't hesitate to type in a question into the Q&A panel. And that's why I have Alex there monitoring things, and he's going to kindly interrupt me because he knows that my mouth can get away from me and I don't let people in to talk. And he's going to ask me some of those questions as they pop up. And any that happen to not be addressed through the webinar, I'll address those in the Q&A at the end as well. So ideally, we'll be hitting all of those questions and allowing you to get as much value and as much quality information out of the session as we possibly can, because of what we're here for. The other thing I wanted to highlight is by both registering and also attending the webinar, we've got a couple of things to give away for you as well. So I'll be following up with each of you after the webinar to provide you with a couple of things. And this is in the spirit of providing access to really robust selection processes. We'd like to give away a free psychometric test to each of you for your next really critical role to be able to utilize. And in addition to that, again, in the interest of highlighting what those selection stages are, a really nice little interview guide for asking the most appropriate and bang for buck behavioral interview questions to follow up a testing process as well, to be 100% sure that you're getting everything that you can out of your selection process and to make the right decision. So I'll move into the first thing I wanted to talk about, and the idea that a selection decision is critical implies that there are stakes attached to it, and there 100% are. I'm going to talk to the cost, the true cost of a bad hire. And these are things that I won't be telling you anything new about this, I don't think. I just want to be able to highlight the facts and I guess remind you of them and put some figures to them. But when we talk to the idea of a bad decision, it can have some really significant direct costs that I'm sure that we're aware of. And in alongside that, we've got those more sort of in the ether indirect costs that then lead to direct costs as well. And this is where the amount of money that you're putting into this process really balloons out. Because with those indirect costs comes an impact on culture and engagement with your current staff and ongoing productivity as well. But in terms of the obvious, like we know that there are, costs associated with hiring anyone. So there's recruiting fees, time spent, so just the overheads of a wage, whether it be your talent acquisition manager or costs for an agency recruiter. But there's money to be spent there. In addition to the salary of that person incoming, training for that person incoming, and then the time taken to realize we've made a bad decision here, whether it be skills that aren't quite up to scratch, or whether it be just a cultural fit, a values fit issue, a temperamental fit in terms of fitting into the team appropriately. At the end of the day, we realize after a little while, we've made a bad decision here. Possible legal follow-ups as well in terms of moving that person on. And then all of that times 2 in terms of costing to rehire as well. So second time round recruiting fees, more time spent recruiting, more recruiter fees, salary again for our new incumbent and their training as well. These figures stack up over time, particularly if it is a really complex role. So a role that requires a significant scale up or ramp up. Time taken to get one's feet under the desk, to re-establish relationships or rapport with different stakeholders, whether it be internal or external, and simply understanding the interrelationship of those relationships as well is a big deal and takes time, and time is money. So direct costs we're familiar with, obviously. Then there's the indirect costs. And these feel as though they might be kind of hard to strap down, hard to conceptualize, hard to put a dollar figure on, and they are. But they exist and they absolutely have an impact. So this indirect cost, the toxic impact potentially for those around the employee. If it's a bad fit in terms of temperament, if it's a bad fit in terms of behavior and values, these have an impact on the people around. They might need to ramp up their workload. It's going to have an impact on their engagement, on their mood, and therefore on their ability to produce and to work at that level that they had been prior to. And this leads to resentment for lack of productivity, both for the first hire and possibly the second, depending on how long it takes. And I use a really safe term there, interpersonal deficiencies. It's a pretty clinical way to state that I think we all know what sort of person we're talking about here. So I won't go into that too deeply, but as we know, if a person doesn't fit, it can become pretty toxic pretty quickly and spiral out of control. And with those culture and engagement impacts, there is 100% a productivity issue. So there's a reduced productivity, for the bad fit, and then for the new hire as well. Training that replacement for the new hire, again, this takes both time, money, and the productivity of those who are potentially helping to upskill this person. Higher workloads for those existing staff as well. And that fatigue does rack up over time, both from a psychological perspective and just purely a physical perspective as well, depending on what the role is. And again, that resentment floats around, and that has a big impact both on their productivity and their engagement. And this is where that true cost does really hit home, because a bad hire can have an impact on turnover and tenure within the existing team. If depending on the seniority of the placement, or depending on how impactful and how bad a fit it really was, this can impact your team more longer term in terms of their commitment as well, and then therefore turnover intentions. So there's a dollar figure that gets associated with that, and to be honest, the research is pretty varied, and the reason for that is that the time frame and the sorts of factors that are taken into account, they vary in scope pretty widely. So it's anywhere between 50% and 250% according to some research. Another has it at between 30% and 150 of the highest salary. One of the more specific dollar figures that has been had a stamp put on it is, there's a quote that around $240,000 is what it costs on average to onboard a new hire. And this is, like I said, across a wide range of organizational levels. But the one that I really like to highlight, and this is quite a famous quote now, at the time it was pretty widely published because it was a pretty shocking figure to put a number to, but the CEO at the time of Zappos, this is an American company, highlighted the idea that is personal bad hiring decisions would have cost the company well over $100 million. And this includes, quite senior hires and then having to rehire and so on. But that's a lot of money. And that is a true cost, capital T, capital C, of bad selection decisions. And you can kind of see where, if there's a small expenditure in the selection process, it can have a better outcome in terms of quelling those later costs down the line. And that's what we're seeing, with our current clients as well. With these costs in mind, these factors, these considerations, our really experienced clients are doubling down on those selection methods. I've noticed this in particular. There might be a pressure put on them to fill a role quite quickly, but there's still a time taken. They're pacing out their decision. They're slowing down their thinking intentionally. And they're doing this by ensuring that CVs are well read, that they ensure a really robust interview process, and a follow-up interview process if required. But where an investment is required, where money is required to ensure that testing is undertaken, for example, like in a climate where there's still so much vigilance and scrutiny of budgets, psych testing is still one of those costs that's been committed to, and we're seeing this right across the board. And there's a reason for this. Candidates can perhaps exaggerate their skill level or bolster their CVs in some way, and they can also, let's be honest, flat out lie about what's on their CV as well. Although it feels like an alien concept, these things do happen. Interviews can be really well prepared for. Any eventuality, any question can be both scripted and rehearsed. But what you can't fake is your temperament, your behavioral preferences, and we make sure of that. What you can't fake is your reasoning and problem-solving ability, the ways in which you have a specific attitude towards safety, or your values alignment. So these things, where they can be tested in an objective and standardized way so that candidates can be compared, that's where investment is going. And I guess this is true and consistent across all sorts of different critical selection processes. The one that comes to mind for me specifically, first and foremost, is that prototypical critical hire. So by that, I mean your really senior, really high stakes selections. So those are the C-suite level, your general managers, and the CEOs themselves as well. That's kind of what you would say, I guess, your truly high stakes selections. And I think we know why, generally speaking. There's the idea that this person is coming in kind of at that top level, and they have a cascading impact, as we know, all the way down through an organization. So one that comes to mind is a selection process that we were a part of at the end of last year. So this organization, it's a community services organization with a really wide reach across some vulnerable groups in Queensland. We're selecting a new CEO for the first time in over 20 years. This was a very successful CEO, a very successful organization, and it was time to change. And this was absolutely critical in terms of fit. And this was a humming organization, is a humming organization. I guess in terms of where this role slots, its fit was critical with the relationship with the board, with the top layer of leaders directly below them, but also in terms of their specific strategic outlook and vision as well. This was a strategic placement. This is frankly a placement where it doesn't only impact the organization, but the community that they service as well. Potentially thousands of people impacted by this decision. Very high stakes stuff. So the way that we approached this was suitably rigorous. So there were 3 candidates towards the end of that process where they were kind of in that short list. And so they were tested. They were tested using the gamut of assessments, very, very challenging abilities assessment, because this is an organization where they need their CEO to be able to solve problems. In terms of their personality, there needed to be a particular fit in terms of their behavioral preference. When the stress was on, which way do they lean in terms of their collaboration, for example, or their proactivity in terms of problem solving? Do they think in a more strategic way, or do they think in a more tactical way, or do they have the flexibility in there to do that? How strong is their emotional intelligence and their ability to read the emotions of people in the room and to influence them and to manage their own emotions in stressful situations? And to influence people as well, to have that interpersonal influence and to be able to lead people in an effective way. So we're looking for a unicorn, essentially. Good news is that the 3 candidates were very, very high level, but differed in various ways that were going to potentially have an impact on the way that they slotted in. So we wrote some really dedicated and comprehensive reports, customized to each candidate and to the requirements of the role. And we debriefed these outcomes with the board. We explored all 3 candidates in really, really significant detail, answering questions about their likely behavior, their problem-solving approach and capacity. And to be honest, this is actually a process that I went a good half an hour on hour over time with as well. I'm a consultant, so time is money, but this was a very, very important thing to go over time with, just to make sure that everyone was completely satisfied with all of their questions. And we had I guess a laundry list of approaches that we could take with each of the 3 candidates. And the debrief and the questions really did inform a second round of interviews, and a selection decision was made, and everyone has been happy as a result of that. Alex, I can see your mute is off.
We just had a question come in about what were the candidates' attitudes towards receiving the testing as part of that process?
Yeah, this is one that I have answered a question about previously as well. It's an interesting one because I guess the fear with making somebody with so much experience and talent and ability and background do a test. It might be like, oh, have I insulted them? Am I disregarding their experience? But no, the candidates were understanding of the process because of the gravity of the situation and of the decision. There's a bit of candidate education that goes along with this as well. But a lot of our top quality, they've used selection processes like this themselves as well in many cases. So the idea is that, well, my experience is one thing, and my ability and my temperament and my values and my emotional intelligence are another, because there might be a pool of candidates that all can boast this really strong ability to do the job, but they will differ in the way that they go about it, and they understood that that's what was being assessed, not their ability to do, but how they would go about it in the first place. Yeah, really good question though, because at such a senior level, it would feel as though, oh, this is something that grads go through, but not at all. And they understood that not only from their own experience, but also because we undertake a significant body of candidate care work as well. For such a high stakes role, we'll actually contact the candidate both through email and phone, ask them if we're okay, explain the process and why, and generally speaking, candidates want to do the right thing. So that's the way that we went about it. Excellent question though. And just to go back to that as well, one of the biggest things that we pride ourselves on is that candidate care. And it should be. Candidates have it pretty tough these days. There's so many hoops to jump through, interviews, CV, testing. Sometimes you have to address selection criteria, so you've got to write a novel. And there's a lot of pressure and scrutiny put on you, and for good reason, a lot of cases. And so one of the things that we commit to is providing really in-depth feedback to a candidate, whether they're successful or not, once the selection process is done and dusted. Because they put so much into the process, they deserve to get something back out of it as well. And just to double back on that high stakes selections consideration, it does impact the future strategy and the direction and the culture, and therefore the likely success of an organization as well, large or small. But by the same token, the magnitude of positivity that can be gained is it's equal and opposite in terms of how much damage can be caused. That can be significant. This can sink a company. This is a big deal. And that's why in this case, the board went through such a stringent process. But they also used it as a strategic change in and of itself as well. The idea is that if we're making a change at this level, why don't we do so in a way that we know will help us in the coming years? Ideally, this placement will be something that is in place for a number of years, and therefore let's think about what direction we want to go in and who is best positioned to help us determine that direction and lead us there in the first place. And the other thing is, you want to gain maximum value from each of these selection stages. So 100%, every CV and the depth of experience was scrutinized, very deeply, and a really, really quality recruiter was used for that process. The interview was quite in depth. Many generalized questions were asked in terms of what those specific competencies were that the role would need to be addressed with. As I said, we went through a very rigorous testing process, and that process informed much more direct and specific and customized interview questions for all three of those candidates. And the reference checking is it's a process that I think has rightfully been viewed as potentially a box ticking exercise as well. But I'm going to cover a little bit later the fact that even reference checking can be addressed with the level of detail and scrutiny of an interview. And this was done in this case as well. So high stakes selection, I think, you can get an idea that this has wide-reaching implications for every level of the organization and everything that organization touches. But at the other end of the spectrum, is one of the other situations I wanted to discuss is that expanding a very small team. And from my perspective, this is equally critical. A very, very small, potentially a family business or a startup who is expanding or looking to hire from somebody outside of that circle for the very first time. Or a small startup with an emerging team. You might be friends, you might be people who have worked together in a few other enterprises before, and you're now starting to add to that body of people. Or a small team within a larger business unit, very tight knit, very high functioning, very high performing, and you want to add somebody else in there. But just from the first example, this is a specific scenario or case study that comes to mind for me quite a lot. Very small, family-run business. They offer a technical trade, both in this situation, they were family members and they were both kind of specializing in a similar area, successful, doing well, but wouldn't be able to expand unless they added somebody to the team with a sales capability. So rather than doing the thing, they were selling the thing for them to do. Somebody with a sales specific attitude and ability, it's very separate to the type of technical trade that they were offering. And they tried this before and the fit just didn't work. There were just not quite the right alignments between behaviors and the attitude required to work in a small business, a small team. Another similar example is one that I also comes to mind from just a short while ago. It was actually just prior to COVID when this happened, but a very small startup had been engaging in work and building a client base for a good little while. And they had a good belt of junior staff, but what they needed was somebody who had that specific experience. It was in comms and marketing. They needed somebody with a high level of experience in providing that from an agency perspective who could slide into a more senior level in that company to almost be that person's, the business owner's right-hand person. But it's more than just that. It's more than just having that technical ability, because when you work for a small business or a small team, inevitably, you need to be able to handle more than just what's on the job description. You need to get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves and do a little bit more and be willing to do that and to expect that to happen as well. And it's difficult to write on a job description, you'll need to do pretty much anything. I think attempts are made at that, but it usually comes off poorly. So the idea, I guess, here was that they wanted to find somebody who would fit into the team well in terms of temperament, but also ability, but also that extra role proactivity type of behavior as well. And the other situation comes to mind for me. This is a personal one, I think, from Mapien and for the organizational development teams. World at the moment is a smaller team within a larger business that's tight-knit who needs to add somebody else to the team. There's a lot of safety and psychological safety in this team, a lot of ability and a lot of trust. And we need to add somebody in who will be able to be filling in those roles, but also who will fit the makeup of the team and to feel that sense of safety and ability in the team as well. These all feel like related but different scenarios, but the way that we approach it, again, similar across, taking that standardized approach. So the way that we approach it is to look at the team, to look at the roles in particular, really ask some very deep questions, not just about task, but what is the culture? What are the values? How will somebody behave best if they slot in perfectly with this team? Really looking at the relationship side of things as well, which is what adds a different dimension to expanding a small business or team, is those relationships and rapport and trust and communication are so key. These are things that need to be, you need to hit the ground running at least with getting along with people. And so those specifics were captured and testing, addressing those things in particular. And anything that pops up as a consideration is immediately listed as something to follow up with in an interview or reference check. But that's not all. The next step will be to really look at the team in particular, and because it is a small team, it's easier to do, but debriefing the entire team, on what they believe is going to be a good fit and how this new person might impact on that process. The likely behavior, questions to ask that candidate at the follow-up interview. And then most importantly, when a decision is made, ideally the best, most accurate decision possible, a thorough debrief with that candidate to provide insight into how they did come out in terms of their problem solving, their personality, how that led to a decision on their placement, but then also how they'll best slot into the team and any areas for consideration for them in terms of their behavior, but also how best to view the behavior of the team as well. So a lot of coaching in that debrief in terms of the both sides of the conversation. And like I mentioned, that's just such a super important process to go through, because adding to a small team is such a high stakes process, because there will be a shift in culture regardless of how close the match is. Say you've got a team of 2 and you add a third, you're adding a whole new factor. There's a whole new set of behaviors, motivations, ability, communication style. There's a whole universe sitting behind that new person's eyes. And they're going to change things. You can't stop that. You can help guide the direction that it goes in, though, understanding what their style is and how they're best going to contribute to that team. And testing will 100% give you every insight that you can possibly ask for in that regard. It's what it's perfect for, actually. So yeah, you want to know what those significant red flags are. They're important to identify, but they're not always going to be showstoppers, because there might be new elements that you've never thought of that could be beneficial to that team as well, that you hadn't thought of, that the testing might raise. That I guess the thing that I'm getting at, and the key for this section, is that the overall impact of a new person on a small team cannot be underestimated. For anyone who's ever worked in a really small team, exclusively with maybe another 2 or 3 people, if one of those people is having a bad day, maybe they're being a bit short, a bit snarky that day, it impacts your whole day. And those are the only people that you work with, really. It's absolutely critical that this is done well. And it's just something that is going to come up, and everyone is unique. And so being best prepared for that is the way to go. Alex, question.
Yeah, we've got a question here about, especially around small teams, what if you can't find the perfect fit? What happens then?
My feeling on that is that there is no such thing as a perfect candidate. The idea that you can pluck a unicorn out of a list a group of candidates. I mean, look, it happens, and you can be very, very fortunate. But there's nuance and degrees of variance away from that perfect candidate as well. And I guess you can be as scrutinous and as picky and as selective as you like. And you might find that person, but your time to hire will also be pretty significant. And then there's the productivity that goes by the wayside in that respect as well. I guess what I'm getting at is that it's very rare to find the perfect candidate, but you can find the candidate that ticks the most boxes. But the testing provides you with insight into what makes that candidate imperfect. Can you take that in your stride? Can that be developed? Can it be coached? Can you manage that maybe in a different way to what you're used to in order to leverage that person's significant strengths? Could it be that a piece of that candidate's application that might seem, or their temperament, their behavior, that might seem imperfect, if managed well, could actually be something that adds value to your team? These are the considerations that I'd keep in mind. So from my perspective, every candidate is great. And it's a matter of understanding what those different nuances are. Nobody's perfect, but you can work with them well. That's what testing is perfect for. Good question though. Yeah, the small teams thing is one that's close to my heart. I've helped a lot of clients out in that regard, and also I've been in that situation myself as well. It's one that if you get right, magic happens. But if you get it wrong, magic still happens, but it's bad magic, is the way I'd put that. So moving along to the next scenario, and this is one that I think, not to sell it too hard, but I feel like Mapien do this exceptionally well, is being able to identify what makes a position really niche, really unique, and assessing directly to those things. The first one that I'll pop up is one that we've developed a fairly robust amount of experience with in the last few years, is a job known as marine piloting. This is a job that I think the general public might not know exists, generally speaking, but it's a really, really critical one for just in terms of allowing a city to run, supply chains, things. Basically, it's the way that ports run, essentially. A marine pilot is a person who will generally work at a port and will board incoming ships and provide guidance, direction, and knowledge in terms of how best to bring that ship into port. Every port is different. A captain or a shipmaster can't be expected to understand the nuances, the weather, the currents, the shallows of every single port that they'll ever dock at. And so a pilot's job is to provide that really direct but supportive guidance in terms of guiding a ship in. And so you might think, okay, there's some really technical areas of that particular role. Technically, they need to be experienced, proficient, have demonstrated ability in the past, but that's just a baseline. That's your ticket to play if you're applying for a marine pilot role. As well as that, you need to be able to demonstrate individual factors, very strong problem solving, but not just problem solving in a vacuum, under pressure. There's a storm, it's 3 a.m., it's dark, there's a lot of pressure. This is the situation that marine pilots will find themselves in. Because of that, high levels of safety skill and awareness and behavior. In addition to that, strong interpersonal skills. These pilots will need to be developing a trusting relationship with a ship captain that might not speak English all that well. Particularly, in Australian ports, we're receiving ships from Southeast Asia, from Asia mainland, and these scenarios really require a quick, skillful ability to be collaborative, to problem solve together, and to demonstrate that interpersonal skill. And because of all of this, they need to be resilient. They need to be responsive to stressful situations, not disregard stress, but to give it the respect that it deserves, but to be able to be gritty and resilient in the face of that. So this is quite again, a high stakes role. Marine pilots generally are aware of these things, but will demonstrate these abilities to a greater or lesser extent. So in terms of testing them, or in terms of selecting them, there is the application process, their CV, where have they piloted before, where have they trained, how many ports have they been at, depending on the difficulty or the prestige of a particular port. And then we get to the testing. So really strong, challenging problem solving is almost like a base level, a must. This is a non-negotiable for marine pilots. They need to be able to solve complex problems that they've never seen before as quickly as possible under pressure. More often than not, time pressure. Testing their safety awareness, and their specific psychometrics that can address this as well. How do they manage to make problems or to solve problems? How do they make the best decision possible under this and the most safest decision under short circumstances? And their interpersonal skills, so their emotional intelligence, but not just that, their personality, their behavioral preferences when it comes to engaging in others, being confident, being assertive, but not too assertive or dominant. But then also, you can be dominant, but you can be not too warm. So then how warm are they interpersonally? Will they proactively seek to make relationships with people, or will they proactively seek to provide support? But are they, not like at 11 when it comes to that? Are they someone who will provide support and direction and advice when they see it's needed, but pull back when it's not? So these are the nuances that we test with the psychometrics process before moving into a technical interview. For example, name a scenario where using the use of a tug is non-negotiable. Name a scenario where you have dealt with a really challenging scenario on ship or at port. And then behavioral questions as well, that come from the psychometrics. So it's a really in-depth process. And this is one where, the process is going to look different depending on who the client is, or what the port looks like, or what the business structure looks like. But these are all competencies that absolutely must be ticked off for a pilot to be successful in their role. Another really niche role that I think doesn't necessarily immediately come to mind unless you're living this, is the idea of a business structure that includes the use of franchisees, business owners. So this is both a scenario where there's a person who owns a business, but there's a 50-50 stake with a larger parent company as well. So there's a few different scenarios that look like this, but when you get down to what that might look like in terms of what they need to demonstrate, first of all, ticket to play, you need to have experience and be proficient in running a business, in understanding the market and therefore marketing, with the capital behind you as well. But then on top of that, you need to be strong and collaborative in your approach with the parent business or the broader business. Strong collaboration and support in terms of your franchise staff, so being able to manage your technical staff well, particularly if you don't have expertise in that field and you've come into this industry fresh. Your ability to plan, to be strategic, to problem solve as a business owner, these are a must anyway, a tick box almost. You need to be able to demonstrate this. A strong understanding of your customer base. So again, this comes to your collaboration with the market, with the broader business and with your staff. To be able to defer technical expertise to your staff and to be comfortable doing that, deferring that power if you don't share the background. And willingness to, I've looked at that twice there, but the willingness to be able to give problem solving or decision-making ability to that person. Sorry about the double up. So again, this is a long list of very specific attributes in addition to some baseline experience and ability there. So in this case, it's kind of similar in that we want, when we know of a very particular profile that works best, and we might have some franchise owners that we have on our books already who demonstrate these really well. So we want to know what that combination of temperament is, their interpersonal temperament, their approach to problem solving, whether it's collaborative or whether they like to take a self-reliant and autonomous approach to it. Again, problem solving is peak. This is a complex role, and the more complex a role, the more important your reasoning problem solving ability is, your abstract reasoning. From a financial perspective, your numerical reasoning, and just your communication style and emotional intelligence as well. So what we do in this context is create a franchise owner profile. Provide these tests to our franchise owners who are demonstrating what we think are these abilities or these competencies, and also do so with the rest of the gamut as well. We want to be able to differentiate and benchmark what does good look like, what does not so successful look like, because that provides us with more robust information and also some ongoing conversations to be able to coach and provide development for those business owners as well. But if we've got a profile that we can test to, then we can use that as a benchmark and test our later franchise owner applications as well. And this can realistically, this process can be followed with really any role like this, where you do have a really specific profile that you're pretty sure this type of person with this experience is going to be successful, and therefore we want to be able to hit as close to this as possible. And again, to answer the question earlier, we're not necessarily going to hit the perfect mark, but we want to get close to it and to be able to work with those areas where they maybe fell just a touch short, but can be worked on as well. Yeah. I guess in terms of what links all of these processes together, I'm a big believer in a really well-run selection process, and I'm never going to tell you that testing should be the one and only decision-making factor. It absolutely shouldn't be. It has its limitations. It provides you with more information. I guess the way that I'd look at it is, if a person is a jigsaw puzzle, the more of the pieces that you have, the more of the picture you're going to see, and therefore the more confident you're going to be in the selection process. So a very robust selection process for me, just from a baseline perspective, will be your CV/cover letter. Is their CV in line? Is it realistic to start with? Can I verify these things? Is it appropriate? With their cover letter, have they dedicated any thought to the job ad or the competencies that they know that the role will have? Have they answered specifically what it is about your team, your company, your organization that draws them, apart from the fact that you're likely to pay them something? Followed by, and this is best practice, psychometric testing, followed by a first interview, followed by a second interview, followed by reference checking. And in a COVID world, a lot of these things feel as though they are in the too hard basket. So there might be just too much to do, and you want to fill the role really quickly because speed is of the essence. My argument to that would be slowing down your decision making is likely to save you a lot of heartache down the track, as we saw earlier, direct, indirect costs, etc. But with interviews, face-to-face or even interstate candidates need to be catered to. I think we're all very familiar with these video interviewing platforms, Zoom, Teams. Some of the other ones are still floating around. You've got Skype, you've got WebEx. It doesn't matter. A phone call and a phone interview is also something that can be undertaken, even in a behavioural context. In a process that we've run recently, because it was hard to get everyone to complete an interview in the same mode, so we couldn't standardize the interview, we had everyone write out their interview answers. So we sent a survey with open fields with the behavioral questions there and some probes to help them to be able to think of the right method with which to answer the questions. And we just got them to write their answers, and we scored them in such a way from the written form. We're still getting their previous experience, but we were able to give every candidate an opportunity to explain their experience in the same medium, so we could compare apples with apples. Even reference checking. It's a pain. Sometimes we can't get a hold of the referee and it will take us several days, but there's software out there that allows you to send reference checking invitations through written form and email to nominated referees. So all of these processes can be undertaken more quickly than you might think. It just requires some planning.
Just have one quick question on that one, Ian, about someone's asking, why is there a need to conduct 2 interviews in a row, so the second interview follow-up?
Yeah, it's and I was fighting between putting psych testing in the middle here as well, because some people like to conduct their first interview. What I've differentiated here is the first interview covers some of those really wide-reaching competencies that have to be hit for this role. You can't pass through the first interview without being able to demonstrate that you have some experience or have solved some of these problems before, for example. The second interview can take both the first interview and the psych testing into account. So in this case, psych testing and first interview can be switched if necessary, or if budget dictates, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the second interview will be more specific to that candidate. It's follow-up questions where potentially they weren't answered quite as well as you wanted in the first interview, but you knew there was something there, or combining both the interview and the psych testing into a new bespoke set of questions for that candidate specifically. And verifying with reference checking after the fact. But yeah, that's a nuance with this list. You might flip one first interview and psych testing, but they can be run in that respect as well. I hope that answers the question. And that kind of actually, it's answered by that first FAQ, and I'm just going to run into these real quick. So the question that we do hear from clients, and this has a lot to do with, it's purely a budget decision as well, but if we want more bang for our buck, at what stage should we test our candidates? And a similar but really identical question is, how many of our candidates should be tested? My feeling on this, unsurprisingly, is going to be as many as possible, as early as possible. Because there might be candidates in there that you simply will decide not to bring through to that first interview for whatever reason. The testing will, ideally you've got a massive list of candidates and it's just going to be bloody hard to read every single CV to make an informed decision. In which case, you'd want to run testing as almost like a talent check to be able to get a broad understanding of what level of talent sits in your candidate pool and who you want to bring through to dedicate your precious time to reading CVs and to conducting interviews with. Problem is though, testing costs money. So you might have a list of 20 candidates. If you've got the budget to, and you have the attitude that, you want to know what this stuff is that the candidates are throwing out in terms of their test results, go nuts. But I guess in terms of a decision, it will be as early as you can, given budget. More information, the better. The more information you have, the more confident that you can be. And this is actually related to the next one. How much should we pay for testing? And this is a hard question because you might know, if you've ever done a scan to see what comparative costs are for psychometric providers. We never give it on our website. We're the same. We don't just give our costing away on the website because it depends, for one. I guess the way that I would answer this to start with is that you get what you pay for up to a point. So if your testing is getting more expensive, my attitude would be ask why. And if it's getting more, ask for a better price. The way that costing works is that there's different inclusions. Whether it's for different numbers of tests, different levels of ability, different reports that you might get out of it, different outputs, how much of my time you might get, for example, if I'm the consulting psychologist and I'm providing a debrief to you, the hire, or to you, the hiring manager and your recruiter. And that's why the packages are kind of costed differently. And so it takes an understanding of what you're getting. And the process is never on the website there, so it's hard to compare. It is our opinion that we pay too much for psych testing in Australia. And we're aiming to address that ourselves personally with our own offering as well, and feel like we have done. But again, if you feel like your testing is getting more expensive, or you want to know where that money is going, ask for a better price. And related to that as well, the costing is often determined by what tests we have, what are those inclusions. So how do you choose what tests to use, what we test, and who we use it for? This 100% is a question that should be addressed or answered by your supplier. If they give you the same list of tests time and time again, There might be a reason for that, but asking what specifically that test is there for is a really good way to answer. If it's a complex role, if there's decision making or problems to solve on a daily basis, you want reasoning in there. It might be that there's a fundamental problem solving aspect to it and a general population level test might work, or it might be complex, or the role might be more senior and it requires qualifications and inherent ability, in which case you want a more challenging reasoning test. I would say that personality should 100% be the bare minimum, because you want to know what they're like. You want to know how they're going to behave. You might know, okay, there's a minimum level of problem solving to engage in, but potentially, it's at a base level. So I want to know how they'll go about it instead. If there's a significant safety element, a safety assessment. If there's a high level of leadership and relationship management, combination of personality and emotional intelligence is a way to go as well. But these questions can be run through in a reasonably short conversation with your supplier or psychologist as well. So having a firm understanding of what's really needed for that role, and then having that conversation is the way to go. Now, I've rocked up to 1 minute before 12, but Alex, I want to know, are there any more questions floating around that I haven't actually answered at this point? Or I'll throw it out to the group as well. Have I not covered something? Love to be able to answer a question or two, just to make sure that you get maximum value out of your hour here today before we sign off.
So we have one question that we haven't answered yet. Someone asked, can you base the hire around what you want the culture to become, knowing that it's going to change anyway?
Yes, but it takes your input there as well. If you've got a particular culture there and you place somebody who comes from a different culture, a different set of values, and will behave in the way that you want to see them, and put them into the team without any further intervention, the culture is not going to change. The person will, or they will leave. So this is where there's a significant amount of work to be done, just in terms of onboarding this person and maybe managing particular interventions, different comms, different rewards and recognitions and structures like that. Other interventions that might come out of, say, for example, a cultural values or engagement survey, where this person can survive. And this is less of a concern, or a concern, but there's less of a factor to keep in mind if they're in that more senior role. Somebody in a CEO role or a very strong decision-making role can help shape, but you still need to support them, because if they don't have the tools, they're going to struggle, and the likelihood that they'll succeed will lower. Yeah, that's where your selection processes join forces with your organizational development strategies and interventions in that respect. Yeah, good question. Any more? What I might do, I might leave the communication channels open. So any more questions that come through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to everyone who's come in today, just to provide some details around, like I said, those giveaways that we're providing everybody. But if you have any more questions or anything that pops up, anything that just churns in the back of your mind that you didn't think to ask in the moment, but pops up at a really inconvenient time, please feel free to shoot me a quick question, and I'm more than happy to answer. But for now, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I might sign off. So look, thanks very much everyone for coming along. That was really fun. Like I said, I'm minutes over, but I can continue talking for a good long while, and no one wants to see that. I'll let you get along with your busy days, but thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to talking to you all. And thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everyone. Have a really good day.
Thank you, Leanne. Right on.